intervene?
Potentially, I suppose.
Order. Marion Fellows to move the motion.
Mr. Clifford, sorry, Mr. Efford, and I beg to move that this House has considered Global Intergenerational Week 2024, which for accuracy I should point out was in April, but I'm very happy to continue on because they do such great work. And it's a real pleasure to speak on this really important topic, and I'm deeply passionate about this idea. I'd like to thank Generations Working Together, who lead Global International Week events in Scotland, for the briefing. And I would also like to thank all 407 contributors to the online public engagement activity. Your responses, all 407 of you, have been very helpful and illuminating, and I will allude to a few of them later. The campaign theme for this year's Global Intergenerational Week is focused on how intergenerational work is too often perceived as nice rather than essential. Generations Working Together argue that intergenerational practice ought to be an essential consideration in upstream health policy, an essential practice in social care and education, and again also in urban planning and development. This is essential in order to build age-friendly communities, which I feel very qualified to talk about, as defined by the World Health Organization, as a community that optimises opportunities for health participation and security as people age. In an age-friendly community, policies, services and infrastructure are designed to respond flexibly to the ageing-related needs and preferences. Global Intergenerational Week, as I said, ran from the 24th to the 30th of April and was marked by events and webinars across 15 different countries, with the landmarks lit up across the globe, including Melbourne's Town Hall. I can't say it, but there was something in Valencia. My Spanish isn't up to that. I wouldn't want to murder the language. Adelaide's Parliament House, and closer to home, Royal Tower in Wales, Belfast City Hall, as well as the Hydro and the University of Glasgow. So the movement is moving forward. Mr. Chair, we are living in a time of huge demographic shift towards an ageing population, a phenomenon that is happening in almost every country across the world, and it's frequently presented as a significant social challenge. It is often thought of as people look at it through a negative lens, but it also actually presents an opportunity. Rather than... Well, yes.
I think this is a very interesting area of public discourse which is developing, and would you agree with me that one of the most positive developments in recent years on this has been the creation and the growth of the Youth Parliament? I just had the opportunity last week to meet Shetland's two new MSYPs, Joe Smith and Bertie Summers, and I was really struck by the fact that although we were talking about the same issues that Shetlanders would identify across the whole piece, they brought a completely different and fresh perspective to them.
For his very useful intervention, and absolutely I agree with what you said. And I also have met frequently with my YSMPs, and they bring a breath of fresh air into arguments and discussions, and we should really treasure that. I'm looking around the room, and I'm not making a huge comment on age, but I know that the person who helps us get speakers into Westminster Hall searched quite hard to find a very young member of the SNP, so thank you. Both groups now, rather than reducing our ageing population to a strain on economic resources, we must use intergenerational opportunities as a powerful and cost-effective challenge to this narrative. Both groups, young people and old people, are often separated from each other due to age-segregated activities and living arrangements, changes of family patterns and breakdown of traditional community structures. So, being a granny is my best job ever. I'm fortunate enough to see my grandchildren regularly, But intergenerational interaction need not only be confined to within families. However, both groups, older people and younger people, have skills and resources of considerable value to each other, and despite the prevalence of negative age categorised stereotypes that are often perpetuated on social media, different generations have a lot in common and share many areas of common concern. Older folk are not all the same, no more than younger people can all be categorised in the same way. Gemma, one of the contributors to the public engagement exercise for today's debate, outlined how integration across generations leads to broadened perspectives. In her experience, she said, with older people, our values and political views may sometimes be different, but there are always more similarities than differences. Whilst another contributor, Catherine, responded, one can discuss different perspectives on issues. This leads to healthy debate, and I find it a good way to temper modern realism while allowing older generations to become more positive about certain issues. Intergenerational activity is one way of addressing the issues that are key to all generations. That's why it's so important to encourage intergenerational working and why it is the raison d'etre of the annual Global Intergenerational Week. By promoting positive attitudes and breaking down stereotypes across age groups, we can build a more inclusive society that values contributions of every generation. Will the Minister discuss this approach with your answer, and will you talk to people in your own department and across government departments? Because this is what we need, is joined up thinking right across the piece. Embracing intergenerational integration will not only enhance social cohesion, but also create an environment where sustainable intergenerational relationships can flourish, benefiting everybody. A response that I particularly enjoyed on the public engagement activity came from another Marion, not me, I promise, who described her interactions with young people as very uplifting. Their energy, creativity, and different way of seeing the world are inspiring and energising in themselves. And I can only echo that from my own experience as a further education lecturer, where I was in daily contact with young people, apart from the very generous holidays, of course. I worked with many young people across the piece, and I found that my perspective on things changed quite considerably listening to them. And it's back to the stereotyping ages and people and actually believing that they're all the same, but it's not true. A strengthening of social capital or civic virtue is at the core of this idea, building a sense of community through reciprocal social relations. There are benefits also in education. The National Mentoring Partnership in 2017 reports that at-risk youths involved in intergenerational monitoring programmes are 55% more likely to be enrolled in further or higher education. The benefits go beyond strengthening communities and education outcomes. Intergenerational practice crucially provides a setting that can help to relieve isolation and involve people in community activities, leading to improved general health and well-being. During Global Intergenerational Week in 2024, my colleague, the member for Central Ayrshire, opened the Intergenerational Learning Roadshow and attesting to the importance of good intergenerational practice in reducing health inequalities. An aside, Mr. Everett, an older person teaching younger folk how to do something as basic as making soup is actually a wonderful thing, because it provides the younger person with a sense of worth and a way of saving money. And I see that often in my own constituency when I visit some of these different kinds of organisations that I do regularly, and see the value of people learning, and the knitting group, again, is another perfect example of that, giving young people a skill that they haven't had before. So a report for Generations Working Together and NHS Scotland outlines that poor health, negative stereotypes and barriers to participation all currently marginalise older people, undermine their contribution to society and increase the costs of the population ageing. Likewise, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's Neighbourhood Approaches to Loneliness programme documented that social isolation in later life is not just a risk factor for depression, but dangerous for physical health and mobility. This shows the important societal value of the practice, but it's also important to note that intergenerational practices help combat social isolation across all age groups. Loneliness and social isolation are increasingly prevalent in our younger generation. Research from Generations United shows that older adults who participate in intergenerational programmes experience a 20% decrease in loneliness. I've seen that in some of the neighbourhood programmes, again, locally, who do such good work. And it's very interesting to notice the difference in both the younger person and the older person. Both benefit. The health impact of loneliness is comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, according to one study published in the Public Library of Science Medicine Journal. And I think that is very true. And having had some personal experience of loneliness, it is very true. And it's something that weighs down heavily sometimes on older people, but again, as I've already pointed out, on younger people who spend more and more time, some of them, alone. Intergenerational practice, therefore, is therefore a solution to loneliness right across the age spectrum. The value of bringing people together can't be underestimated when it comes to challenging ageism and negative stereotypes. According to the World Health Organization's global campaign to combat ageism, intergenerational activity is a proven way to reduce it. And doing so can help us live up to 7.5 years longer. Therefore, and I'm very keen on that, I have to add, therefore it is essential that we improve and increase access to intergenerational activities. Not only does the evidence point towards the need for intergenerational practice to tackle a range of social problems, but also there is a demand for it. The Centre for Ageing Better found that 4 in 5 people want to mix with people of different ages and generations. We as parliamentarians must do our best to highlight barriers to intergenerational interaction, especially when we consider our ageing population. Some of the barriers listed by respondents centred around communication, where there are difficulties understanding terminology or descriptors, and some older people feel that they have to be more sensitive or careful. Other barriers mentioned were practical issues, such as rural deprivation, poor transport, and lack of face-to-face opportunities. Many younger respondents feel that financial issues are the biggest barrier. Jenny outlined many older people who have no mortgage or rent or dependents find it very hard to grasp the real impact of the cost of living crisis. Anna, another respondent, said older people frequently don't understand the real practical barriers for people my age, from home ownership and being able to afford children. Tom, another respondent, felt that intergenerational interaction and communities were being eroded more generally due to the low rates of house building and how it forces young people to move away from the communities in which they were born and raised, severing community ties. It's essential that we attempt to remove barriers to intergenerational integration. It's something that benefits society as a whole, and that each one of us can benefit from it. In a time when the world is becoming more and more polarised, never has community and understanding across generations been so important. Therefore, I commend the work of generations working together for the crucially important work that they do and the importance of Global Intergenerational Week 2024 for raising awareness of this topic. Does the Minister agree that we would all benefit from more intergenerational working and that health, social care, housing, education and even more essentially urban planning and development should be further moved and that levelling up would be good for all generations?
Just remind members that they should bob if they're intending to speak in the debate. The question is that the House has considered Global Intergenerational Week 2024. Kirsty Batt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for chairing this meeting. It is great to speak in this debate alongside my colleague and friend from the SNP. I'm afraid I can't profess to speak for young people, being now 38, although that is considered a young parliamentarian, I am told. If you're under 45, you are considered to be a young parliamentarian, but I probably no longer consider myself young. 9 years in this job has given me quite a lot of grey hairs that I never had before. But I do really appreciate the work and the diversity that there is within Parliament. It's not good enough yet. We're not as diverse a Parliament as we should be. But that plethora of voices and those different outlooks and backgrounds that people come from mean that we make better decisions because we've all got different life experiences and we all come from different backgrounds. I'd like to also thank Generations Working Together for the work that they have done for Intergenerational Week and for particularly for the work that they've done in Scotland in highlighting this and trying to ensure that as many people as possible are talking about it. Although my colleague said that this shouldn't be seen as something nice, it should be seen as something essential, I completely agree with that, but it is also something nice. It's something fabulous that should be celebrated and talked about and also should be written into practice. It should be written into practice at all levels where the government has a level of control. So all kinds of public sector organisations should be expected to consider and work with and implement intergenerational practice wherever they can in order that we can get the best possible decisions made, in order that we can get the best outcomes for everyone. Nobody, Mr. Chair, is simply a strain on economic resources. Whether somebody's young or older, whether they're black or white, whether they're disabled or they're running marathons every weekend, whether they're gay or asexual, whether they're a migrant or they've lived here all their lives, whether they vote or not. Every single person has value and every single person has a unique experience and a unique perspective that they can bring to the table. We've got responsibility as representatives to listen to all of those voices, every single one, in order that we can try and make those best possible decisions. If we're listening and understanding all of those different perspectives as best as we possibly can, we're more likely to consider those perspectives when we're taking those decisions and to make better decisions for everybody who lives in our constituencies and across these islands. In Scotland and in the SNP, civic values run through everything that we do. In Scotland, the people are sovereign, not Parliament. We should and we do celebrate diversity and value everyone for those perspectives. So I'm unsurprised that this work has had a great base and has taken off in Scotland. There's a few things that I wanted to talk about my personal experiences and things that I've heard. There was a great reception in Parliament this week by Girl Guiding. It was the first Westminster Palace brownies that happened, and it was truly brilliant to see brownies in the Parliament. It was actually really cool coming up the stairs and hearing applause, because it's so rare that you hear applause in Westminster. So hearing that applause and going in and hearing the brownies singing, for example, was just absolutely fabulous. I was a Rainbow Leader a number of years ago, and one of the best things that we did in my time as Rainbow Leader was did Christmas carols with the nursing home next door. So we took the rainbows, who are very small, from 5 to 7, 5 to 8 in an age, took them next door, and they sung Christmas carols for the the older people in the care home. And it was just such a fabulous event because everybody enjoyed it. The kids enjoyed it. The Rainbows had a brilliant time singing. The older people in the care home really enjoyed it. Maybe they didn't see an awful lot of young people in their lives. Maybe they were isolated and lonely and enjoyed those interactions. I genuinely loved doing it. I also, when I went to a sheltered housing surgery in my constituency a few years ago, met a chap from Aberdeen, and this chap had been a tram driver in Aberdeen. Now, the trams in Aberdeen stopped in 1958, so he was a wee bit older than me. And I was speaking to him, and I've got a bit of an obsession with public transport. I'm not a geek, honest. No, I definitely am. But I've got a bit of an obsession with public transport. And for me to hear about the history of this and to hear about what it was like actually driving a tram and the routes that he used to take it on, you know, the history of my city came alive to me much more in that moment when I was able to hear about his experiences. And I love the social history stuff, but actually being able to hear it from someone was just one of the coolest things, again, that I've done in my time. This week also I shared with a group of my colleagues a photo that had been taken 13 years ago. This photo that was taken 13 years ago was a photo of my family. It was me, it was my son, it was my dad, it was my granny, and it was my great-granny. We had 5 generations in one room, in one photo. I know that most people are not lucky enough to have those 5 generations together, but we had about 25-year generations, so it's about 25 years in each of the generations. And the experience for everybody was so affirming and so brilliant to be able to be part of that thread that runs through that group of people that link together those generations, and all come with different perspectives and all come with different experiences. My great-granny's dad was killed during the course of the war, and the First World War. And what happened as a result of that is she grew up in absolute poverty. And then if you compare that to the situation that we are in now, that, you know, my children have grown up absolutely not in poverty, and those different perspectives and different experiences and the improvement that we've managed to make in our own lives over the generations was really lovely for my great-granny to see and to hear and to understand that my children weren't going to have the same childhood as she did and the same struggles that she faced. So it was really brilliant on that account. Understanding between the generations does break down barriers, and it does make for better decision making. I've mentioned that a few times now, but if actually there's studies that have been done that show if you've got a company with a more diverse board, they make more money. As a result, you know, that is empirical, solid, statistical evidence there that diversity ensures that lots of people with different perspectives can come together and make the best possible decisions. So I do think that it's incredibly important. I've been meeting with Age UK a couple of times recently, and I spoke in here about digital exclusion, and particularly thinking about some of the older people as well as people who are in areas of deprivation, for example, struggling with digital exclusion. And I do appreciate and agree entirely that lots of older people can teach lots of things to younger people, but younger people also have valuable experience and understanding that they can teach to older people. There's organisations in my constituency like Silver Surfers, which brings together older and younger people in order that the younger people can teach the older ones how to access online banking or online shopping, or how to check when their bin collection is online. And that intergenerational learning that can be passed in both directions, I think, is really, really brilliant. Everybody, no matter what age they have got some wisdom that they can offer and some learning that they can share in that. I think it's really important as well, and having been in public, having worked as a local authority councillor and spent a lot of time dealing with various public services in the public sector, there can be silos in those organisations. There can be silos in decision-making in organisations, particularly in the public sector. I don't know so much about whether those are in the same in the private sector. but ensuring that we have got those barriers broken down. So whether that is about ensuring that people of different ages and different generations are spending time together in decision-making together, or whether that's ensuring that people from different public sector organisations are spending time together in decision-making together, then all of those ensure that we get better decisions for everybody. In Scotland, one of the other things that we've got is the Getting It Right for Every Child curriculum. And a part of the approach in schools and part of the approach in local authority care settings, for example, is about ensuring that we get things right for every single child. Now, I would definitely go far further than that if I had a magic wand and was in charge of everything, and ensure that we're trying to get it right for every single person. Ensure that we are looking at their unique circumstances and we're providing the supports around them that they need at that particular stage in their lives and the challenges that they happen to be facing at that time. One of the things that I talk about quite a lot in Westminster Hall, and I'm always surprised that Labour doesn't talk more about, because you should, is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act that there is in Wales. It is one of the most truly brilliant pieces of legislation that there has ever been that I've heard about. It's in line and on a par with some of the stuff about global domestic well-being that we're doing in Scotland and the founding of the Wellbeing Economies Partnerships. It's entirely about ensuring that that decision-making is protecting the quality of life and improving the quality of life for those generations that are coming through. The Future Generations Commissioner in Wales works to ensure that decisions that are taken by public sector bodies protect younger generations, that they're not just taken for older generations, that they're taken for everybody, and that they're taken to ensure that high quality of life is carried on or is improved for everyone. And I think that it's incredibly important that when we're thinking about decision making, we're thinking about well-being. We're thinking about improving well-being for individuals as well as for societies and communities. And for me, that piece of legislation is incredibly useful and underlines that. And just lastly, I wanted to talk about trust and loneliness that my colleague spoke about. There is currently, with an awful lot of young people and who have been through COVID and perhaps spent a period of their school lives not at school because they were at home, there is an issue with trust with some young people. They don't necessarily have the trust in their teachers. They don't necessarily have the trust in authority figures. They don't necessarily have the trust in older people because they did have to spend a period of their formative years when they should have been learning about interactions away from others and isolated and lonely as a result of COVID. Now, breaking down those barriers and ensuring that younger people and older people are put together, are working together, are doing things as a team rebuilds that trust and brings back that likelihood that young people or younger people will be able to say, actually, I recognise the value and the experience and the wisdom that can be brought to the table by people who are of other generations. I recognise that they might have a different perspective to mine, but it's just as valuable and just as important as mine. So I think that in terms of ensuring that we get young people to engage with systems that they have to engage with, to not just feel that they have to step out. It's particularly important during a cost of living crisis when some of the parents and some of the young people themselves, the Girl Guidance Survey last year said that 63% of young people living in the most deprived areas worry about the cost of living and the impact of them on their families. 63% of girls, that is. Now, we've got young people who are worried about that and who are struggling to engage with authority figures because of what they've been through. Improving those relationships, having them work together and realise that older people are not terrifying, that they are in fact lovely in most cases, it really helps to break down those barriers and to ensure that those young people are able to contribute to the full extent of their talents. Mr. Efford, thank you again for chairing this meeting, and thank you once more to my colleague from Motherwell and Wishaw, who I am absolutely delighted and honoured to stand up beside in this room.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Efford. It's a real pleasure to participate in this debate with you in the chair. And I also, of course, myself want to thank the member for Motherwell and Wishaw for securing a debate on this subject. I always say, and I really do believe that being a Member of Parliament is the best job in the world, but I was delighted to hear from her about her joy in being a granny, which surely is a very important job indeed. And it's such a privilege to be here for the first time, as I understand it, when we've debated this really important subject as a Parliament. And, of course, as was mentioned, while the Global Intergenerational Week passed a few weeks ago, it's excellent to see colleagues gathered here today to be discussing it. And it really is important that we embrace intergenerational practice and relationships, whether that's as individuals, as groups, as organisations, or indeed as governments and political parties as well. And we've heard many great examples of that, actually, during this brief discussion today. Examples of living arrangements, bringing people together, different projects, different organisations. Also about oral history as well, which I agree is incredibly important. And it was very interesting that the member from Aberdeen North talked about some of the practice that we see where children are brought into residential homes. My children also had that experience when they were attending a nursery, a cooperative nursery, and it was incredibly important for them, particularly because they don't have close relatives living right next to them. They're further away. So I really felt that was very important indeed. Of course, as well as bringing people together, we also need to make sure that all people of different generations and age groups are protected from the kind of stereotyping that we're hearing about, or indeed even discrimination. We need to ensure that everyone, regardless of their age, is treated with dignity and respect, and that they're treated equally in our society. Of course, the Equality Act 2010 enshrines in law protections against discrimination on the basis of age, and other protections as well that apply to people of any age, so that no one can or should be discriminated against because they are or are not a certain age or in a certain age group. And for 14 years, that landmark legislation, and many other countries have tried to copy the UK on this landmark legislation has protected people of all ages from direct and indirect discrimination, as well as from harassment and victimisation too. And I believe it has helped to build understanding of the challenges that different age groups face, challenges that are often commonplace among the generations. And again, the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw made a point of stressing the fact that many of these challenges are common. It was great to hear the Member for Aberdeen North talking about some of the privileges that we have as parliamentarians, the job that we do when we're seeking to represent everyone in our constituencies. And I also had that privilege of seeing the Brownies with their first ever meeting in the House of Commons, which was very exciting indeed. But another privilege that we often have as parliamentarians, I'm sure that others will have had this, is that people often send us reading material. And I was sent a fascinating book called Generations by Bobby Duffy, who's done a lot of work on really looking into the kind of stereotypes that exist about different generations. And his book very comprehensively demolishes the idea that, for example, young people today are fixated on ephemeral issues, that they're only interested in kind of having fun, that these issues around the cost of living in particular aren't important to them. But his book also shows that those generations, younger generations, really are concerned about the health and well-being and success of future generations. And I'm very glad that the Well-being of Future Generations Act was raised. Of course, a great achievement of the Welsh Government and something that really structurally ensures that those concerns of future generations are represented in government. Now, of course, we then also see some of those big challenges that have been talked about already this afternoon, in some cases sadly carrying across the generations, issues around mental health. The issue of loneliness has already rightly been mentioned, and of course one that does apply to young people as well, where social media use can often exacerbate actually rather than bring young people together and combat loneliness. But of course this is also a big challenge for many older people. Age UK has done wonderful work on this, but indicated that 1.4 million older people report themselves as being often lonely, which I think is a terrible statistic for us to reflect on and surely, hopefully, to act on. And it was great to hear about some of the projects combating this operative in Motherwell. I would also refer to the Clock House project in my own constituency in Blackbird Leys, the great work that they do with older people, bringing them together. But clearly we do need to do more. And of course we need to do more across the generations when it comes to mental health too. And I would say there particularly around the crisis in children's mental health currently, with very long waiting lists for support. We need there to be ensuring that we do have much higher staff levels within the NHS. We need to make sure this is integrated with schooling as well, so that there are specialist mental health professionals at every school. And we also need to make sure there's much more open access for mental health, whether that's for young people, for indeed middle-aged people, or for older people as well. And we do have to break down barriers to opportunity at every stage. Today, unfortunately, inequality is entrenched across the country. Inequality that's regional, racial, inequality between men and women, and class inequality as well. And there has been a promise traditionally, I think, in the UK that that we can tell our children and grandchildren that, well, if you work hard, you'll be able to get on, no matter what your background is. Well, that increasingly has not been the case for many people, unfortunately, in our society. And we're also seeing, actually, that for many older people who've worked hard all of their lives, they're in an increasingly difficult situation. The housing crisis was rightly referred to, and clearly for many young people this is a huge challenge. But as was rightly mentioned by the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw, we're increasingly seeing this being a challenge for older people too. So lots of older people now living in precarious housing, poor quality private rented sector housing. The first time that has been the case for a number of decades, actually, and something we really need to be facing up to. Also need to ensure that we are considering all generations when it comes to big challenges like combating violence in our communities. And, I pay tribute to the work of Age UK, but, I was very concerned to hear that it was Age UK hard work that led to government systematically collecting information about the rates of domestic violence against older people, that wasn't routinely collected. It's really concerning. It should have been routinely collected, because we need to learn from it to make sure that every older person is safe. And of course, we also need to understand new forms of violence as well, and control, and that means having a focus on the kind of online issues that have been touched on already within this debate. And we do need to look at how ultimately these different generations are progressing or otherwise. There is a measure of that, so-called income persistence. Well, the UK currently has American-style levels of income persistence, significantly higher than the OECD average. That means that your parents' income determines a huge amount of what your income is going to be as a young person and in subsequent generations. Other countries are far better at disrupting that persistence, and we believe we've got to take action on this. The Social Mobility Commission should be involved in recording and analysing data on this, and so that we can really learn from analysis of other sources like the longitudinal education outcomes data as well, so that we can be ensuring there's much greater intergenerational income mobility as well. And also, I would mention, I feel that I can't not mention it, we need to recognise the contribution of every single generation to our society and to our economy. One generation that I've talked about a lot are people in their 40s, 50s and 60s, particularly women in that category. That group of women doesn't get talked about very much, actually. They don't get reflected very much in the media. They do a lot. They tend not to complain very much. But they are often squeezed at all ends. They're providing huge amounts of care, often as sandwich carers. They're trying to hold down a job a lot of the time. They're trying to support children financially and emotionally, often their partners as well, or parents too. They often are experiencing health problems as well, and in some cases they're finding it challenging to manage menopausal symptoms alongside work that's not sufficiently flexible or suitable. And politics just hasn't kept up with the requirements of that generation. It should keep up, because the number of women moving out of the labour market falling into that generation is very, very significant. We calculated our economy is losing about £7 billion of untapped potential because of those women being forced out of the labour market. Surely we need to do better there. We need to be acting on these issues. Yes, very happy to.
I just want to take a moment to commend the Honourable Member from Labour for bringing up that group of women. She's absolutely right. They do not get talked about enough. But I think there's a responsibility of parliamentarians to ensure that we are talking about them, thanking them for their contribution and in trying to make life better for them, or at least slightly more bearable than it currently is. So thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you very much, Mr Efford. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for what she said there. And I think here it's very important that Parliament is in step with society as well. And we have seen a huge amount of change here. We have seen much more of a focus on these kinds of issues. And we've seen significant positive change across the generations as well when it comes to many of these issues. I think it's very interesting, for example, that the level of childcare that's undertaken by both parents has changed substantially over recent years. If we look, for example, at shared leave, although it's still not the progress we would want to see, but also nursery and school pickups, time off when the kids are ill or during school holidays, all of those things are now viewed as part of the parcel of being a parent, not just of being a mother. But clearly there's much progress still to be made, but there has been change over the generations. And as I say, Parliament and politics really needs to be catching up on all of this. In doing so, we can work together across generations. We can learn from each other about what has changed things in a positive direction. And just to finish, if I may, Chair, I think that really gets to the root of what Global Intergenerational Week is all about. I was referred to a moment ago that teams that are more diverse tend to have far better outcomes, particularly in business, but that applies everywhere else as well. If we're not including every generation in our decision-making, we're not going to be taking the right effective decisions. And I think that the work undertaken by those who've been promoting Global Intergenerational Week really underlines that and also enables us to celebrate that wonderful contribution of all generations, and surely we should be doing that too. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stuart Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And can I also start by thanking the Honourable Member for securing this debate today to mark a Global Intergenerational Week, and all those who have contributed in the debate, and also to put on record my thanks to all of those organisations, not just in this country but around the world, that have helped enable it to be a really important week. And it has been fantastic to hear the success of that week this year, and the range of inspiring sort of community-led initiatives that have been encouraging of people of all ages to come together in meaningful ways that help to build those friendships, but also help people build new skills that they probably didn't realise that they had. The Honourable Lady mentioned the issue around housing, and I was struck because literally just this month, my own mum has lived in a sort of complex flat, if you like, a housing association flat that, dare I say, full of lots of older people. And we've now managed to get her into a bungalow that's on a street full of families, a housing association, older people's bungalow, but a street full of families. The difference that I saw in my mum in one day, going from that flat to that bungalow, was incredible. And so I do think she's right to raise the issue about planning and housing. And when I was the housing minister, it was actually an area of work that I was trying to focus on. Unfortunately, politics took over and I left that role, but there you go. But can I assure her also that we do talk cross-government about many of these issues, and I'll try and highlight some of the work that we're particularly doing. And I think also a number of members have mentioned those conversations and those relationships with people from different generations from our own. And I think we all remember them, even as old as we get, we remember the advice that we have from, whether it be from our grandparents or great aunties and uncles, or even just older people who live down the road. I don't know if it's well known, but I love baking, and I've got some of my skills from people who knew how to do baking in a really, really good way, and I've held that with me, and I look forward to the time when I can pass it on to the next generation. But we do know also, and I think it was right that others have mentioned, that there are a substantial number of older people who do suffer from chronic loneliness. And as was often referred, this can lead to both physical and mental health strains, and that she highlighted the work and the analysis about smoking of 16 cigarettes a day. A lot of that work has come from the US Surgeon General. He was here recently at an event in the House of Lords, and it was fascinating to listen to, you know, the sort of medical evidence that exists about the impact that loneliness can have on people. But it's not just older people, as the honourable members have said. We know that young people, particularly between 16 and 24, can often be a group most likely to report feeling lonely. And what the evidence is showing us is that actually it's often transitions in people's lives that bring about those loneliness moments. And it's not surprising that when you are young, you may be leaving home for the first time, you may be going to university or starting a new job, and those are instances where you can become lonely, and it's why it has been a particular focus of the work that we've been doing in the department this year on trying to help young people who are going to university for the first time, engaging with them in ways that will interact with them, and hope that we can do some more work, and I'll refer to that in a moment. But bringing together the different age groups can be really a great way of fostering those better social connections, and it's essential really for building empathy and understanding the issues across the generational divides, if you like, and sort of dismantling any misplaced stereotypes. As the loneliness minister, the idea which most resonates to me is the power of those intergenerational relationships in combating that social isolation and loneliness for all ages, because loneliness doesn't discriminate. People of all backgrounds can experience loneliness at any time of their life, and I know that I have personally. And so that's why we are committed to tackling loneliness, ensuring that everyone can benefit from the power of meaningful connections, particularly those who are the most vulnerable people in our society. And so our work to tackle loneliness is driven by three main objectives that have been set out in the world's first Tackling Loneliness strategy, which was published in 2018. And the first is to try and reduce stigma of loneliness by building that national conversation. It is so true that so many people don't want to admit that they've experienced being lonely or don't know what to do about it. And so to try and tackle that issue of stigma, the National Communications Campaign that we run has now reached tens of millions of people since it was started in 2019, and it is to try and raise awareness about the issue, but crucially to provide advice on what people can do to help themselves, or indeed to help other people that they may suspect be suffering from loneliness. And the second objective is really to try and drive a sort of lasting shift so that relationships and loneliness are considered by organisations right across society, because it is a complex issue that can only be addressed in partnership. Government can't do it alone. And I think what's making this work so good in this country is that there is that strong partnership between government, but also crucially, so many community and local organisations and national charities in helping us to advance that agenda. And that's why government and our partners, we've invested £80 million since 2018 on tackling this really important issue. One of the things that has been funded is the £30 million Know Your Neighbourhood Fund, which we launched last year, which is to try and create volunteering opportunities to help reduce loneliness. And it's particularly looking at supporting new and existing schemes in some of the 27 most disadvantaged areas in the country. And last year I had the great privilege of visiting one of these projects in Hull, where Age UK, a charity that's been mentioned by members this afternoon, were running a befriending service. And they were creating volunteering opportunities for younger people to befriend older people who were at risk of becoming lonely. And it was just so brilliant to see the intergenerational relationships that were forming. But also that those older people who sometimes don't see people from week to week actually suddenly having someone who is regularly going around to see how they are, check on them, getting to know them, and make them feel that they are part of the community in which they live. And what I also loved was the differences of the conversations, you know, one talking about tech and the other one talking about post-war living. It was just fantastic to see. And the final objective of the strategy is to improve the evidence base, because I think that's so important, so that we can make a compelling case for ongoing action in this area. And that includes research that we did ourselves, and that really helped us to understand the prevalence of stigma associated with loneliness. And as I say, I'm very proud to be the Minister for Loneliness and to lead the work addressing this important issue across government. And like many of us here today, I want this country to be a place where we can all have a strong social relationships and feel really connected to the people we live in and around. The Intergenerational Week also presents a good reminder that volunteering can be a great way of supporting that intergenerational cohesion, much like the befriending service I've mentioned. And stakeholders have told us that these intergenerational volunteering, which can be really flexible and a form of micro-volunteering, can have a number of positive impacts. It can improve the sort of cross-generational mental health and well-being and reduce age segregation, which itself can lead to a variety of issues, not just loneliness, but anxiety and poor health. But it also helps to foster that attachment to local areas and provide that positive community outcomes, such as community connectedness. And we know that there is growing interest in the opportunities that intergenerational work presents. And so we want to work with all of these organisations who are already doing some fantastic work in this area, and to learn more about the positive impacts it can have and what more we can do to try and help foster more of that happening. I think another thing that's really important to mention is about building social cohesion, and we're trying to do that through supporting sustainable communities, and that's why we have given communities significant support to provide them with the power and the resources to shape better, more connected neighbourhoods. And that's why we're currently delivering the new Community Wealth Fund. And I think this is going to be really important, because the idea behind this is to support communities to improve their own social infrastructure in neighbourhoods that perhaps don't have them at the moment, and then therefore miss out on all the opportunities for grants and things that may exist. And also to empower local people to make the decisions for what they think is best for their communities. And so I'm pleased to say that there'll be £87.5 million allocated to that fund, and it comes from the expansion of the Dormant Assets Scheme. I think there's another key role as well, when I think about other parts of my portfolio, in how we get intergenerational connectedness happening, and I think that's through social prescribing. I think there are real opportunities here for bringing different age groups together. It helps connect people to the community-based support, and including activities and services that meet those sort of practical, social and emotional needs that affect their health and well-being. And it can work well for those who are socially isolated or are experiencing low levels of mental health. One of the themes for this year's Global Intergenerational Week was building, as the Honourable Lady mentioned, those intergenerational workplaces. And we want to champion the benefits of such a multi-generational workforce and promote the importance of retaining the skills and the experience that older workers have. My colleagues in DWP are regularly engaging with employers and employer organisations to encourage positive attitudes towards older workers and helping many of them return to work, some of the people that honourable members have mentioned earlier. And I know that colleagues in DWP have been working with employers which team up workers across generations. One example is a pottery manufacturer in Stoke-on-Trent with a long history of producing high-quality products where traditional methods and modern technology can often work together. And of course, both older and younger workers can use the differing technologies, but clearly those with more experience of the traditional methods can pass on their expertise and their experience to their more recently joined colleagues. And I hope that we can see more of that work happening in the future. So we are committed to delivering a comprehensive package of support to help older people remain in and return to work, and that will include through the dedicated 50-plus champions at job centres and those midlife MOTs. Other members mentioned areas around young people, for example, and in my role as Minister for Youth within DCMS, I've had some amazing visits around the country. And I think actually this is where a lot of these youth centres can really form important relationships between generations. The Honourable Lady mentioned that often young people, if they're disengaged from school, it's no disrespect to any of the teachers, but that relationship has a different one to perhaps with the youth worker. And that mentoring is so important. And our hope is we're rolling out programmes that will do more of this, so that actually you embed in that young people that actually having relationships with people from different generations is often beneficial, and something that hopefully they will then pass on to the younger generation as they get older. And others have mentioned youth voice. I always want young people around the table when we're talking about issues that affect them, not least because they do it so brilliantly and articulate it in a way that I couldn't, but also because, as I say to them every time, there's no point this grey-haired, middle-aged man trying to decide what young people want today. So things like the Youth Parliament, I think, are great at providing those opportunities. But also, as the Sports Minister, we've obviously got our sports strategy about how we get more people active. And I'm really pleased to see that Sport England are now investing £250 million in a place-based investment. And I went to see one of these schemes in Canvey Island, and it was great to see in this leisure centre that there were young, very young people playing with footballs next to older people doing chair exercises. And again, that sort of, getting them together, I think was really, really important. So, of course I will.
Just on that, he's made me think about the Cruyff courts that there are. And I don't know if he knows anything about Cruyff courts, but we've got another one in Aberdeen opening on Monday. I'm massively excited. It was Johan Cruyff's Foundation has created these courts, and basically they pay money towards having a football pitch. But the football pitch has to be beside a community centre or some sort of community building in order that you can have both that community interventions and that space as well, but also that the football pitch can be used by anyone in the community. It's truly a brilliant initiative, and I would encourage him to have a look at Cruyff Court systems.
Well, that sounds really exciting because I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we are investing hundreds of millions of pounds in new sports facilities, but it's about making sure that it's not just the same people using them all the time. How do we get other generations using it? How do we get more women using them? Because the rise in women's football has been amazing for us all to see, but the number of facilities that are available or that are even appropriate for women hasn't been good enough, and that's why we've just done this Lionesses Fund. But I will certainly look into the projects that the Honourable Lady mentioned. So if I can conclude by saying that I really think today's debate has been an important conversation, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member and all Honourable Members for their contributions today on something that is an important and an enlightening subject. And as I agree with the Honourable Lady, it is nice too when you see these different groups coming together. And so, we are determined to do what we can to see more connected societies and an intergenerational approaches that will be a really important part of that work. And I hope that we can come to realise and value that those intergenerational relationships do build a happier, healthier and more resilient communities. Thank you.
So wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. Can I just say, I think it's been quality here this afternoon, if not necessarily quantity. I think it's been a wide-ranging debate. I think we've covered many, many different areas, and I'm very grateful to everyone who stood and spoken today. I've learned more, and that's always a good thing. And I think it's, if anyone's watching this, they'll learn an awful lot more about how good intergenerational working is, either working in the job sense or just working together with a common aim to teach and to learn. And I think also really, really important is that the Minister started by talking about his mother and about how much better she was in an environment that wasn't an enclosed environment just for older people. And I think that's at the heart of what we've been discussing today. Generations being together and being interested in what each other are doing. The Honourable Member, my friend from Aberdeen North, actually it's very unusual and very fortunate to have had at one point 5 generations together. And I really envy her that, as being the daughter of an older mother and having children a wee bit later myself. I'll never see that, and I don't suppose any of my family will, but it doesn't have to be family that does this work. It's actually often sometimes better if it's not family. But when you look at large families of different cultures, if you're on holiday or if you see different groups of families, you realise that the ones that are very cohesive are the ones that include all generations. And actually that's a great thing. I don't want to dwell, and I know I haven't got much time, but I do also want to refer to the reading material I'm going to run and get now, Generations by Bobby Duffy. I think that'll be very entertaining and enlightening, because I think the more people talk about these things, and the more we read and look at the evidence that the Minister has referred to as well, anyway, in the government gathering, but evidence that we can all see in books and in just general chat, I think that will benefit everyone. I really want to thank organisations locally, and I think everyone else has already, their local organisations. Befriend Motherwell is a really fantastic organisation run by one of the churches, and there are other organisations like that in my constituency. They manage to bring together different generations who all learn from each other. And just to end, I think the fact that an older woman with dementia called Elspeth now asks her great niece, who is a head teacher at my Elspeth's primary school, which is about to start in a few months' time, is actually a really wonderful example of how being older, bringing older and younger people together really benefits both of them. Thank you, Mr. Edward.
The question is that the House has considered Global Intergenerational Week 2024. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The sitting is adjourned. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.